and then we'll get going.
Well, welcome everybody. We want to start with a little bit about why we are here today. So we all know that this meeting is to share with you a little bit about the transition of child find and FAPE responsibilities from what is now Child Development Services to the school districts. And we want to talk a little bit about why this is happening. As many of you know, if you are working in the public schools, you may be a special education director or an elementary principal or a superintendent. You have known that there have been students coming into kindergarten with unmet needs. And so what has happened is CDS, not due to the staff at CDS, we want to make that clear. We have really great employees who work in the field of early childhood special education. That is their area of expertise. That this is not because they are not doing exactly what they need to be doing. The system of child development services is basically just not working correctly and is not able to provide early intervention in early childhood special education to our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Part of this is because CDS doesn't operate a school. And so you can imagine what that would look like if you had to piece together all of the services, including a classroom for a child with an IEP. So you had to reach out to all of your providers in your area and find first grade classroom. And then you had to go find a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, and you had to piece that all together. So this is part of the reason why operating early intervention and early childhood special education without a school district has been really difficult. Because of that, it also requires much more administrative and overhead level, and that has been driving up the cost for serving children. And then because of this, we've been attempting to provide programming for children with disabilities. And so what has happened is that we've had basically separate early childhood programs, which does not provide them their peers and least restrictive environment as well. And then the last thing on this list, and we're not going to go into great detail, but we recently had our monitor from the Office of Special Education and Programs, which is the federal government. And they are very aware that we have children in this age group that have unmet needs and are very concerned that these children are not receiving their services, but are very aware that we are engaged in this process to help rectify that.
So in the last legislative session, there were 2 bills that came forward. The main one that had most superintendents' attention, as well as the attention of our special education directors, was LD 345. A piece that was sort of unusual was that the actual language and text of LD 345 was also included in the budget, which was LD 2214. The bottom line is that the even through the amending process of the bill and the work sessions, that language continued to stay parallel between what was in LD 345 and what was included in the budget, LD 2214. At the end of the session, the budget passed. That included all the language that had been in LD 345. LD 345 was left on the appropriations table and looked like it did not pass. So there was some miscommunication around had this in fact become law. And just because LD 345 did not pass, you need to know that it is now in law. And what the law states is that by July 1, 2028, the responsibility for the assumption of the FAPE obligation will shift from CDS to SAUs. So I'm going to let my colleague Erin jump in.
Yeah. So what we're talking about, we're trying to kind of change the language that we've been using in Maine to delineate what we're actually talking about. We talk a lot about Section 619 services, what we mean, and what Section 619 services are is early childhood special education. We're probably never gonna, it'll be years to come before we start using that acronym ECSE fluidly. But this is what we're talking about, special education provided to preschool age children. And this is why the structure of CDS currently doesn't work, because it's a standalone early childhood special education system without any programming to offer. We also know that there's not enough programming with the private providers in our state to provide these services. And we also know that we're not in compliance with federal law around this. So the services are designed to help children with disabilities participate in activities that are typically appropriate for the developmental stage. It is a different level of service than school age services. And our partners were finding that that difference is new and different for schools who are typically used to providing a school setting and having people access that. So children who qualify for early childhood special education can receive services in a variety of settings, including, but not limited to, preschool classrooms, the home, community settings, Head Start, preschools, private programs, private child cares, and clinical settings. So it's much, much different than everyone is offered this one thing we call school K-12. And the other thing I just want to point out is that early intervention is also included in child development services, but that system is not an educational-based system. It is early intervention, birth to 3 years of age, and it is a system of support. Everyone in Part C, early intervention, is defined as having a developmental delay. There are not the 14 categories that we're used to in special education.
So let's talk a little bit about the elements of the law. So this law provides for a transition of child find and FAPE, which is free appropriate public education, responsibilities from child development services to the school districts. And that is to be completed by July 1st, 2028. As Erin mentioned earlier, those services can be provided directly or in the school systems, or school districts can contract with their public and private providers to support these services. They also can access their CDS regional sites, and we will talk a little bit about that later on in this presentation, or other regional supports to provide services. And part of this is that if you are interested in being in Cohort 2, you will participate in a readiness plan, and that gets reviewed and approved by the Commissioner of Education. Megan?
Finding that mute button. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the funding. And the main thing to know about this law is that it is intended to fund the cost of special education services for this age group at 100%. And the language that's actually in the law is that the funding may not be appropriated or allocated through general purpose aid for local schools and must be provided at 100% of the state share. In other words, this is not going to be subject to the local and state share split. And so, right now, CDS is responsible for 100% of the services and the cost of those services. And that is what this bill and this law continues to try to reflect. The Maine DOE will implement a funding formula to fully fund the SAUs for the assumption of the responsibility for child find activities and for ensuring that FAPE for all children. And I'll talk a little bit more detail a little bit later here. It is important to know that we recognize that there's also going to be an impact on children who are in the referral system or in child find. And to that end, we have identified an allocation for that as well. The group is also working on identifying how we're going to fund the cost of high cost in and out of district placements, similar to what's in place for K-12. We are in process right now of evaluating what that will look like and how those costs will be covered. There are also some additional grant funds that are available to SAUs that assume these responsibilities this fall. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but specifically the pre-K expansion as well as the revolving renovation. The law also included an additional $4 million for that school revolving renovation fund. It is a special revolving renovation fund insofar as revolving renovation fund funding opportunities are on an every other year cycle. So this is an off year, and there should not be a revolving renovation, opportunity this year, but this was included in the law. And if I had my wish, I wish they hadn't called it a special or a revolving renovation, because as I know, as you all know, that there's a lot involved there, and ultimately it wasn't for a huge amount of money. It was really intended to be the cost that it would be for a school to assume the FAPE obligation to, make sure their classroom is retrofitted to meet the needs of preschool age child. Nevertheless, and when they call it a revolving renovation, it meant that we were subject to the law and to the rule that dictates how revolving renovation works. So, but as part of the element of the law, there is $4 million allocated. And then finally, another piece is that in the last few years, the DOE, the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education, have worked to support a pathways project for current CDS employees to earn their 282B. And so as part of this law, $1 million was allocated for a year to be able to pay for that program's continuation.
So CDS over the next 4 years will transition the regional sites and support hubs to be aligned with the superintendent's region. That was part of this package. It will have a minimum service offerings, and guiding principles for the regional support hubs are going to be created. So these hubs are already in development, and they're currently working to support different SAUs in a variety of ways. They are, as part of a component of the law, is to establish a parent advisory committee to really understand how parents, what types of information they need and what kinds of feedback they have for the organization, which is currently in process. And then currently, as we know, the services aren't completely available for this age group. So if there's any compensatory education that happens in CDS while the children are in CDS, that would be the fiscal responsibility of CDS. The other thing we want to point out is that CDS will maintain responsibility for Part C moving forward. This is not something that will go to the SAU. As an SAU, you would be more involved in Part C because there's a transition process where children are transitioned from Part C to Part B. But under the IDEA, Part C is a separate early intervention program. We have rebranded that program to be named Early Intervention for Me. And so that's not covered in this law. There's no SAU would not be responsible for taking over that section of IDEA. And then other provisions, the Maine DOE will establish an early childhood special education pathway project. You already talked about that. It is expanded to beyond CDS staff, though. That is the feature of this, is that we're working to get that certification out to more interested parties in the SAUs. And then we would develop an opportunity to disseminate information about our Maine PERS system. And as CDS employees are under Social Security at this point, I think Megan reviewed the revolving renovation fund. And in the last component of the law, we were required to establish a centralized Maine care billing system for Part B.
So as you can imagine, this is just a little tiny project that we're taking on here at the department. Just kidding. In actuality, it is a huge undertaking, and we couldn't do it without all of our implementation teams here. So we have folks from the commissioner's office, the governor's office. We have our data team that is helping us build our data systems. We have our amazing fiscal team that is helping us figure out all of those funding formulas. We have all of the staff at the OSSI team, the Office of Special Services, supporting this project. We also have our CDS sites that are not only continuing to serve and support children in this age group, they are also engaging in the work of building those CDS service and support hubs. And they're also helping support our SAUs who are in cohort 1. So we have really have great support with our CDS team. We have our early learning team, which is our general education for our preschool age group, and they help cover technical assistance in public pre-K, Head Start, all of the different types of settings where preschool children attend. We have our certification department that we work closely with the 282B that we've been working on. And then all of our school facilities are also helping with this implementation. So let's talk a little bit about what cohort 1 has looked like. And just remember that due to the timing, we had a very short, we're going to call it runway, to get this up and running. And we use this analogy all the time that we are literally building the plane as we're flying it. And so we have currently 17 school districts that are engaging in this pilot. We meet with them on an as needed basis. We also have we're having weekly meetings. We have now moved those to every other week, where we have either professional development. We may have different topics that we need to cover. We also have all of the implementation team that I just talked about working cross-agency. So we are meeting behind the scenes with all of these teams to help figure out any of the questions that may come up or any of the systems that may need to be developed to make this run smoothly. And then we are also working with national experts. We have a national expert, 619, former director, and then we also have our technical assistance centers that we work closely with. So as I shared, we do meet with our school districts that are in cohort 1. We are now meeting with them every other week. And we bring together different topics. It could be from finance, our early learning team. We also have our national Part B 619 expert who comes and provides professional development. We have our finance team that has supported the building of this funding formula and the timeline for that. We also just went through our second child count, October 1st, and really got that pathway kind of smoothed out for the next few child counts. We have our data team that is working on all of the systems behind the scene for our federal reporting requirements. And then working with our CDS, as Erin mentioned, we are working to create our parent advisory groups as well. So looking at the CDS service and support hubs. So all of our 9 regions are currently still there in those regions. Eventually, we will be shifting them to represent the superintendent regions. This year, what this looks like for the service and support hubs is a collaborative process. So monthly, we meet with our school districts that are engaged in cohort 1, and we look at what can our local CDS site do to support this transition. And it has taken shape in a variety of ways throughout the state. And so some of our cohort 1 school districts have said, we're good, we can handle this, we've got all the resources and supports that we need. And then other school districts have said, well, we're not quite sure what the referral process might look like. And we didn't really have much time to set it up. So they have their local CDS site supporting that referral process. So it's individualized for each SAU, and it can be changed as we meet monthly. So school districts could say, I'm having a hard time. I had a speech therapist go out on maternity leave. Does your local CDS site have someone that can help support this service? And so we work very closely to collaborate to ensure that students are receiving their services. And so part of this is also us developing that list of services for each of the service and support hubs throughout the state and looking at what they can do to help our SAUs in the process.
All right, so I'm going to provide a little more fiscal information. I see Paula Gravel is on the call. I like to think of Paula as sort of my fiscal attending. And so I'm going to try to walk us through for a moment about how the funding is allocated. One of the first things that we want to highlight is that this is not a reimbursement model. That the way it would work is if you were one of our cohort 2 schools, what we would do is we would first work with you ahead of the July 1 count date, which is where the first quarterly allocation is sort of determined. And once we know sort of how many students you have both in who currently have IEPs as well as children who are in the child find process, we would work to determine that allocation. The way that is calculated is sort of there are two elements really to speak to. There's the SAU's unique EPS rate, which is sort of the base number, and that is then added to the special education additional weight. So the way to think about that is that if you're, for the simple round numbers kind of rounding, if your SAU has as your unique rate, your general education unique rate is $10,000. Then when you add in the 1.5% bump or weight, then that is $15,000. So in total, it is $25,000 per child. There's also an additional allocation. So if you have, say, 4 children who have been identified as being in the child count process or the child find process, sorry, each of those children has a one-time allocation of $1,000. And those funds are really intended to cover the cost of the time for any assessing that may need to be done, and some of those other time and effort costs that could be incurred. As I mentioned before, the first allocation is based on the July 1 count, and then there's an allocation from there. So let's say you start with July 1, we run the numbers, and it appears there are 30 children who are coming your way. You'll have the first allocation shortly after July 1, after that count, and that there'll be a quarter of the total allocation for the year. And then October 1 is the next child count time. And that's a unique time because that's the only time we true up. And what that means is if we anticipated 30 children coming your way, and then the year starts and you actually only had 28 children come in, and by October 1, you're still at 28, then the total allocation will be recalculated down to 28. That is the only time there's a calculation where your numbers could go down. Of our 17 cohort 1 SAUs, we didn't see any numbers that were lower. So that was not the case at all. But that is the only time when it is considered a time when it could go down. In the subsequent quarters 3 and 4, if the numbers go back up again, then we add the allocation back in. We recalculate up, but never back down, only up. And again, to reiterate what I mentioned before, this is fully funded, so that if an SAU determines, wow, there's a student who has these high needs or there's something else that's going on, we do have our folks meet individually with the lead and the special education coordinator and whoever else is on the SAU's team to sort of work through and review and make adjustments as needed.
So let's talk about what this would look like if you were to join Cohort 2. And we have already had many school districts reach out and we have met with them individually. And so what this looks like is we would come to the meeting with information about what the current landscape looks like in your catchment area. And we would come with numbers which is kind of a general estimation. We would come with what we currently have, knowing that those numbers may go up or down. We would also come with giving you an understanding. Most school districts have access to SYNC, which is the student information system for CDS. If you don't have access to SYNC, we would help you understand what the student's IEP needs are. We would also support information about what does your landscape look like in regards to the private providers. That could be any of the contracted providers. It could also be any of the early childhood educational settings in your area. And then we would also come with kind of an estimate about the funding for that. We asked Cohort 2 folks, if you are interested in joining Cohort 2, that you assemble a local team. That would be the superintendent, your special education director. We ask you to name a transition lead. That could be the special education director. It could be an elementary principal, somebody who we can have in contact with. And then also, of course, your business manager. So part of this is also the self-assessment or the readiness plan. And so once you express an interest, and we will share how that is done if you did not see that in the priority notice, we will be pushing that out to you so that you can take a look at your current pre-K programming, what your services are, and if you have any needs in regards to space or staffing. We would also, that helps you identify potential partners in your community. We would also encourage you to talk to the Cohort 1 SAUs that have been participating in this journey with us. And there are some here tonight, this afternoon, they joined us. And also looking at other school districts in your region who may be participating. We've provided a link on this slide deck that you can plug in your town or your zip code or an address, and it will pop up all of the local childcare and preschool programs, so you can have a better understanding of those early childhood education programs in your area. We also have an amazing staff person at CDS who will come and visit your pre-K programs and provide some consultation about how to make your classroom accessible for students with disabilities. And then another great feature that we have just released is our new updated website, and there will be a live link in this as well to share with you all of our recorded sessions with our Cohort 1 for our Cohort 1 meetings, and then lots of other great information about early childhood special education. So here's a list of the SAUs that are engaging in the pilot, our Cohort 1 schools, and you can see that they are fairly throughout the state, all the way from Aroostook to York County, taking on this endeavor.
So, if you're interested to sign up, we would like you to complete a simple application. It's very simple. It's just showing your interest in doing that. And the link here is provided. We'd like to get a firm understanding of whether or not you would like to join us by February 1st, 2025. And please do check out that website. There's not only tools that will help you structure and support. There's physical tools, there's certification tools. So there's a lot happening on that website for you to check out. And if you would like to have an individual meeting with us to determine whether or not you feel like you're ready to move forward, that is also something that we could schedule for certain.
All right. So thank you. We're going to stop sharing, and we're provide some time for questions and hopefully some answers. I'm going to drop a copy of the slide deck in the chat as soon as my computer allows me to. So you'll be able to have that and access links from there. I know there are a bunch of links in there. So we've set aside some time now for questions and answers. Anybody have some questions? If you could please raise your Zoom hand, we'll call on you. Kim, thank you very much for raising your hand.
It took me a minute to find it. It's been that type of day. I missed the very beginning of the session because I was in an interview. And just wondering if there was any conversation in regards to the 3-year-old population and funding if they're in like a special purpose school. Is the allocation this that you just mentioned, the 10 plus the 15, or are those reimbursed placements, say through a kids piece or a Stillwater Academy, things like that?
Great. I'm going to pitch it to either Aaron or Sandy for that one.
Yes,
Yep.
we have a high cost. I'm gonna let Sandy talk. Sorry. Go ahead, Sandy.
So Kim, we're not allowed to say reimbursement.
Okay.
Just let you know it's an allocation. And so depending on the documentation that you would provide to us, if that allocation is not enough for that child, let's true it up. We will make sure that that is covered. And that's whether it's 3, 4, or 5.
That occurs in the moment, not at like in April for the high cost out of district.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't want to say it happens in the moment, and Paula, please help me out of here if I'm saying this incorrectly, but after we do our child count, you would then receive an allocation. And then there is this high cost out or in district mechanism that we are currently working on. And then if that was not covered with your allocation, you would receive additional funds.
And one piece I would just sort of add on here is that the reason that the fund was set up as it was is to say this is what we anticipate the cost will be for educating all of your 3 and 4-year-olds or taking care of their special education services. And we recognize that allocation, that per pupil allocation I described, which is sort of like how the total cost is funded, there are going to be a number of students who are below that, who have, speech for, a small amount of time each week, who are not going to really be that much. So when we talk about a single child who, needs a one-on-one or as in a placement in a special purpose private preschool, if the total cost of what it costs to educate all of the children in your catchment area goes above what we've allocated, that's where those adjustments are made. Paula, did I cover that?
Yes, that's very, excuse me. Yes, that's exactly it. Good job. Yeah, basically the allocation, we know some are going to cost less, some are going to cost more. And so in the end, if you don't have enough to cover all of them, because some of them cost more than what was expected, that's when we were going to provide additional funding to ensure that you have all the funding needed to cover the cost for all of the students. And it will come in the same year.
Harry.
Hi. So on the fiscal side, in terms of budgeting, as all of us are getting ready to start this process, do we treat this as sort of anticipated revenue, sort of as we're doing budgeting? I mean, I guess I'm not sure what to do with the information, like once we know about how much we will likely get.
So here's an important factor regarding this funding. This is not going to be general fund. This is not going to be EPS. This, in fact, has to be completely separate. So this is not going to be part of your regular budget for operating your general fund, your general ed, because this does not have a local share at all. This is completely separate. So there's a different fund, revenue fund and code to use, as well as expenditure code. And it has to be kept separate. So
Yeah,
nope,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of Carrie's question about like, well, as we're in, the throes or just the beginning of the throes of the budget process, how do we do this? And I know we've got a couple folks from cohort 1 who are on, and I don't know if that makes sense to be one of our superintendents or somebody else to jump in and talk about how you managed it, kind of going into it, because you were quite a bit further along by the time this passed. It was well past a lot of folks' budgeting period. So, Scott?
So, Carrie, what your business office is most likely going to do is take a chart of accounts that Paul is going to provide you, and then you're going to load that into your financial system as an enterprise account so it keeps track of the expenditures and the revenues. Then if you're doing a really good job of that over the course of the year, when you're coding all your invoices, then that's going to address Kimmy's question and your question all at the same time, because it's going to let the DOE know what you're short through that chart of accounts. But it also is totally separate, treated as an enterprise account, not part of your general fund, not part of your grant accounts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I just may have a fundamental misunderstanding, so I'll move on if I don't get it after this. But I anticipate that we are gonna need some additional staff, like not maybe full bodies, but maybe contracted workers or maybe 1 or 2 special ed teachers. Like, I anticipate the budget going up. So I'm just trying to figure out how this money coming in is gonna sort of offset that, so it doesn't look like we're just spending more and not getting anything in return.
Right. So what it's going to do is, because it's floating through an enterprise account separate, right? Then it restate your question again. I just lost it there for a second. Sorry. It is confusing. It's confusing for a number of different reasons. I'll go
Yeah,
into
so I'm anticipating we're gonna have to add some
Yep.
amount of staffing. So
Yep.
how am I accounting for that in the budget process so it doesn't look like we're just up and not?
It's going to show up. It's going to show up in that enterprise account. You're going to have salary lines. You're going to have contracted services line. You're going to have administrative lines, and then all the tie lines that tie in there. Um, and then that's how you're gonna. Here's the hard part for us, right? We are so used to looking at our resources and then seeing what we can create with the resources that we have. This is a totally different philosophy where you have to sort of build it before they come rather than wait for your needs to get there. So it is a different way of sort of thinking about the money and the
Am I
process.
gonna be thinking about what portion of what potentially current employees might be serving pre-K, and then that portion would be in the.
Here's the beauty. It's sort of up to each individual district there, right? So if you feel like for our district, we had some budget issues, so I took on those responsibilities for this year to see if we could sort of ameliorate that condition, right? But I can't see that I'm going to be able to sustain that much after a year. So we're going to have to look at some administrative costs. So
So I see both Joe and John kind of waving. So I saw, and I'm sorry, Laura, your hand is up. I didn't forget. I'm just there are people in cohort 1 who I think can answer Carrie's question.
I'll just jump in before I have to run to another meeting. Joe Fagin, RC 29 up in Rooster County. I'm gonna say it in a weird way. It was magic money. Okay. So here's how it happened. We said yes, right? We signed all the paperwork, we jumped in, and then we got this magic number from Paula. Paula said, I think you have 15 kids in your catchment area. And we said, okay, we have 15 kids. What does that mean? Here's your money. And then we built the program. You know what I mean? Then we went and found the staff. Then we shifted a staff member over, and then we looked at the IEPs. Then we said, oh, now we need, you know, more staff. And then we went to the staff, and then we just kept working in that model as you do that. And then obviously Paul was sending us new codes, right? Spreadsheets. And then after that, we captured our data, which is our numbers that went in November 8th. And here comes the next round, which we did go up to 19 students. And then we'll see how we do. So the other thing I did not know, and I'm hearing that cohort 2 may get a little deal on the table. I'm not going to spoil it, but I thought we were just going to get a little bit of money for a classroom. We got $75,000 for new equipment. That was very helpful. And we did put in for SRRF to adjust those classrooms and add some bathroom things going on, and we're moving forward. So there is some magic money, but you don't know what anything else looks like until you say, yes, here's how many kids, here's the amount, it's separate in this little magic column over here, and you spend that down and you go find people. I think the hardest thing if anybody is finding people, right? I think that's going to be the challenge that people are going to have to look at. So,
John, anything to add to Joe's point?
Yeah, I just think this is just such an exciting opportunity where you truly get to build something from the ground up, and really focus on what's best for students. And there isn't the same model for all schools. And I think just having that flexibility of thinking, I think sometimes we get so concrete and this is what the state says, and then what does that really mean? This is an opportunity to really look at things and say, how do I best meet the needs of the students that I have within the dynamics I have within my buildings? And I will tell you that the staff in the Department of Education have been fantastic and extremely supportive of all the work that we've done. And they didn't pay me to say that, by the way.
And I will say our runway, when we use that plane analogy, was very short. So what Mr. Fagnet was talking about is like, they were kind of like building it as they go. Our hope is with Cohort 2 that our runway is much longer. We will start in February building that runway for you to be up and running for all of this. So.
Rachel, I see your hand up, but Laura's been waiting. So Laura?
Thanks. So some of my questions got answered. So with these 3 and 4 year olds, would they be in our synergy? I mean, I'm just curious about that. Like, are they in our enrollment, or is it like a separate thing?
Who would like to answer that on our team?
Go ahead,
I can
Erin.
answer it. They are enrolled in Synergy. There is they're enrolled as members of your population. The difference is if they're 3, 4, 5 in preschool identified in special education, the funding formula is different, but everything about how we're monitoring that data in the NEO and Synergy systems have been built.
Okay. And
if I could, sorry, I was just going to add to that real quick. So what happens is, because we are still using Synergy to collect the enrollment data, and because this is funded separately from EPS, those enrolled that are in a cohort that is part of this project, getting funding separate, we will remove those counts from the EPS calculation and ensure that the funding comes through this other fund. But we still collect them the same way. You don't do anything different.
And just another question. So we have 282 pre-K teachers. We have a couple in our district. And so if they're providing SDI, then potentially their positions could be funded, or I see Erin raising her hand.
Yeah, and I think there was a similar question in the chat. And so, yes, if you have, and that's part of that chart of account, if you have, a speech and language provider as what was in the chat, who is serving some students in K2, and you're also going to use some of their time for the CDS students, then we would be talking about percentages. For the question about Synergy in the chat, we are working on that right now. So what had to happen this year in terms of the data integration was that the names and the information for enrollment had to be largely manually done, and we did that on our end, at the DOE end. But we're working on data systems to make that a little bit smoother and a little bit more seamless. And so we'll need to get back to you about what the data integration possibilities are between the Autoload and Infinite Campus. Rachel, I didn't forget you, and I see Pat, then you're next also.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to use the little yellow hand that kept popping up. 2 questions. So when I met with a few people a couple weeks ago, they had talked about that there were approximately 73 students in my area. Some of them we already have in our buildings. We have a full day 4-year-old program. What happens if you identify that there are 73 students and then give us an allotment for those 73 students and that number isn't is too much? Do we have to like return it, or how does that work if it's, or if the number doesn't really go the other direction? Like if a student moves, they're not part of my group anymore.
If I may, everybody, the initial count that we use in July is an estimate. October, when we get actual counts, because the year has started for most, October 1, that's the only quarter, because we adjust every quarter, so there's 4 counts. In October, if the counts are less than what we estimated in July, we'll reduce the allocation, and what we're doing is paying you also quarterly. So those first counts, if it was 73, we created an allocation, gave you the first quarter. In the second quarter, if it's 50, we're going to recalculate down to the 50 count, and then we'll adjust the funding accordingly for the next 3 quarters, lower than what you originally got to make up the difference. We wouldn't ask you to refund though. And then that's the only quarter. October is the only quarter that we would go down. In the next 2 quarter counts, January 1st and April 1st, even if your counts go down from that October count, we will not adjust down again. We will only go up if your accounts go up.
Okay, so that was the first question. The second one was, I brought the information about that there was a building grant that was available, and I brought that information to our group of folks, our directors. It was due October 31st, and the decision that was made sort of in the group was, you're running too late. You needed to get estimates, on what it would cost to add more space to the building, add bathrooms. Like, I don't have any of those estimates. And so we let that date go by. And we're going to do sort of a building analysis in the next couple of weeks to see exactly what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. What do we do if we determine that there's a room that we are going to use for preschool and we need to add a bathroom to it? Now that's it, we don't know what we need until we start really laying out what it's going to look like. And that was too quick for October. We hadn't even met about the cohort yet.
Yeah, we absolutely understand the timing. And if I could give you just a little bit of background on why the timing was, as I mentioned before, with the revolving renovation fund, in order for the funds to be spent down in the time that was identified in the law, the October 31st was like the latest we could do. And then the other preschool expansion project that went out was using federal funds through MJRP that needed to be obligated before the end of December of this year. So that's why those particular projects had those earlier due dates, recognizing that it was going to limit the field. It was the best we could do at the time. So we do understand that not everybody could participate just in terms of where schools were, SAUs were. So, Rachel, did we cover your questions?
But just if we needed to add a bathroom now at this point, are there still other funds that we can dip into that will move? So once we do this sort of building analysis on what we have and what can be adjusted or not adjusted, is there another opportunity between now and July to get into another grant or something to help with those costs?
As Joe mentioned before, in terms of like, there was some funding that was used to help with the actual setting up of the rooms, in terms of furniture, and supplies. I don't know the extent of that, or sort of where that's been capped. Erin, I don't know if you can chime in on that at all, but.
Yeah, we do have, we have been provided a fund that, we initially had a lot of federal money and some grant money from COVID to cover really millions of dollars of classroom equipment and furniture. I think that you've taken advantage of some of that in RC 21 because our partnerships have had them. we still have some of that money available that we're hoping that cohort 2 will also get really nicely furnished classrooms. And I don't have, so the potential, that might be a potential. Those monies will dry out, and probably within the next year or so. So I think it's another incentive for folks to, participate now, because those classrooms are really nice.
Yep. Rachel, anything else?
Nope, that was it. We have a beautiful classroom. Lori, I can't thank her enough. And I don't know if Ellen's on here, but Ellen's my assistant principal that helps with our preschool, and they set it up and it's absolutely gorgeous.
That's great. That's great. All right. Pat?
Okay, it was shared with us at one of our regional meetings recently that if we have 3-year-olds who have childcare, maybe even up to an hour away from us, that we were going to be responsible for providing FAPE for them. I don't know how people are handling that situation. That would be helpful to know, because I know that that would be next to impossible for me to do.
Yeah, that's we're really working as a state to understand how we're going to be providing services for children outside of the catchment area. We've been kind of monitoring how that looks in the SAUs that are currently in cohort 1. From what I understand and from our initial understanding, it's very few children that are in that scenario. And we're maintaining data on it. At this point, it's a very individualized conversation that SAUs are having. And what we're finding is that, people are handling it different ways. They are offering some services in their SAU and parents are availing themselves of that. They are offering clinic-based services and parents are availing themselves of that. Some folks are now partnering and saying, I have 4 of my kids in my SAU that you should have in your SAU. And so how can we work together? And what we do want to keep intact is the relationship with the family who's going to eventually be in your SAU. However, we're really, as a state, looking at how that will be handled in the future. We're looking to other states to see what they do. There's lots of different ways people handle that. And so far it's, it's something that is going pretty well for our cohort 1 as they look to that. So it's not as black and white as it is, Pat, in the school system, because you offer in your K-12 program a school setting. And in this age group, we don't offer a school setting. So there's lots of different things and different places and different access points. So it is really handled creatively and individualized. What we're hearing is that the parents who are working with these SAUs in cohort 1 are just so grateful for the connection and the relationship and the interests that are happening with children, feeling like this kind of disconnected system, which has been CDS, has been trying to support this, but is not connected to their community. So now these parents are really building relationships where their children are going to be most likely attending school for their school career. So it's not as black and white as what you've heard, and it's being handled in a bunch of different ways. It's not been terribly problematic at this point, and I am planning to do some work to help our special ed directors, especially, who are very concerned about that, and our superintendents, understand how that works. Susie Perry, who's on this call, is the fabulous 619 consultant that used to be the 619 director for Arizona. So there's states that have a lot of experience with this topic, and we're still determining how we're going to proceed with that. Are we going to do something akin to what we do with our K-12, this private schools in my area, and this is who I'm going to serve? Or do we do partnerships? We're we're exploring a lot of options, and this is kind of us building the plane as we're flying, kind of seeing what works for us and what's working. We also have, with Cohort 1, provided some scenarios of how those conversations look. Those are on our website. And I think that was really helpful for Cohort 1 and kind of demystifying that idea of it's really just a very different perspective of how we're approaching these services, because the least restrictive environment is really different for early childhood special education than it is for school aged.
I see there are a couple questions right at the end here. Sandy, yeah, I think that does make sense for that last question. Sandy will connect with that person. There was another question about education in the unorganized territories and about providing services. Our team is working with Rick Colpitts, who is the director of the education in the unorganized territories, to kind of work through a lot of the details about that. Right now, CDS does provide services for children who are in the UT. That continues on right now. We're just at the beginning of our work with managing that question. So
also on the director call, I'm going to have someone from Cohort 1 to explain those processes for our directors to kind of help people understand that. So just look forward to that at the end of November.
Yeah.
Is there a way to download the meeting chat? There's some great stuff in here, but I can't copy it fast enough.
Yeah, we can do that for you.
Thank you.
You know, we're just about at time. The piece that I think we all have been learning along the way is that every superintendent I've talked to, every director I've spoken to, has said, look, we know this is the right thing. We know that early intervention really pays off for our kids immediately, and then in the years along. The trick is the how to do it, and that's where part of what our team has learned this year so far is that the how is going to look a little bit different in every SAU. And we are really committed to working, not just with sort of what your SAU's approach is, but even on some individual cases where people are saying, like, well, I've got this child who is attending a childcare an hour away. What in the world am I going to do? And the team meets monthly with SAUs to talk about the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and adjust those so that if you need to work with CDS, who is providing services an hour away, to be able to cover a student, those kinds of responses and different ideas can be put into play. What we all know is that what CDS is currently set up to do just isn't working as we want it to. And the success of this transition is vital to the health and well-being of our children. And so we are so appreciative that you are here, that you're asking questions. We are deeply committed to the work. So please do, continue to ask questions, and we hope to see many of you on our cohort too. Erin and Sandy, anything else?
That is all.
All right. Thank you very much. We will be posting this recording on on the early childhood special education page on the website, and we'll also be following up with the chats. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.